Welcome to Travel Around the Block. Join Joel, Mike, and their guests as they explore how Web3 and AI are reshaping the way we journey, invest, and connect across the globe.
Welcome and welcome back to Travel Around the Block, where we explore the latest innovations in travel. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Daniel Senyard, SVP of Commercial Platforms and Innovation at Flight Centre Travel Group. Daniel was previously the CEO of Shep, an asynchronous omnichannel communication tool that uses AI to understand context, enabling enterprise travel managers to communicate policy and priorities to travelers as they search for travel across the web. Pretty cool. With Shep acquired by Flight Centre Travel Group, one of the world's largest, Daniel now leads their commercial platforms and innovation, helping navigate their journey through today's rapidly changing landscape. So whether you're a business traveler, enterprise travel manager, or travel supplier looking to unlock new distribution possibilities, or maybe just somebody fascinated by how AI is reshaping the travel experience, Daniel's path offers valuable insights. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Daniel. Great to have you here. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Thanks again. It would be great, Daniel, for those of us who maybe know you slightly less well than others, it'd be great to hear just a bit about your background. Have you always been in travel? Is that where you grew up even from when you were knee high, or did you journey into travel over a process?
Yeah, this is going to take the rest of the podcast, but I'll try and shrink it down a little bit.
Right, then in second grade.
Exactly. Yeah, so grew up in South Africa, always wanted to be a teacher, so studied English, was going to be a PE teacher was my goal. Really liked writing, the sort of language side, writing, and so ended up through a winding journey in Seattle, doing some copywriting, some technical writing, decided not to go down the teaching route and was working with Microsoft Teams, doing some copywriting and ended up doing some project management. Just started moving towards more and more tech and the intersection of tech and marketing. Moved to Austin and just to scratch that writing itch, started covering South by Southwest as a sort of pseudo journalist / blogger back in the heydays of that. So yeah, and at that point started talking to CEOs and co-founders of startups. And it struck me that quite a few of them were non-technical. They were marketing people or product people or idea people who, it was fascinating that I thought that starting a startup required some heavy technical person with an idea. And most of them pointed me in the right direction and said, if you've got an idea, go to these meetups, read these books, read these blogs. And yeah, was how I moved from normal jobs in marketing departments to ending up being a startup founder with an idea of music photography. So pre-Instagram days, going to concerts, being at the back and starting to see people take photos with their phones. And at the same time where Foursquare was very popular, so checking in, sharing where you were, and then social, people starting to post photos to Facebook and Twitter a little bit. And so I saw that convergence and thought, be really cool if I could check in at Austin city limits and take a photo, and based on that timestamp, it would know who was on stage. So that was my first startup, was like a music photography app where the bands would promote it and say, download the Vivo Gig app, take photos. Photos would show up on the sides of the stage, big in between shows. People could vote on them through the app, and then you could win signed guitars and such. So that was my first step into technology, was like this photo sharing thing that Instagram came and killed. So that was good intro into it, following just my interests and my passions. Like I love live music and was writing about tech, and these things just seem natural to me.
Very cool. That's quite a confluence of interests and passions. And I have a feeling there's an entire other podcast we could do just diving into all that you learned in the mosh pit and all the lessons from that part of the world. It almost reminds me of the sequel to Get Shorty, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but there's a whole music world there to be explored. So some other podcast, but that's a very cool start, Daniel. And I'm wondering, were there any early lessons that kind of stayed with you from that first go around through entrepreneurship? Anything that you might want to share for the next person who might benefit from your experience?
Yeah, I think the main thing I learned there was I was voraciously reading and trying to understand how to be a startup founder. And everything I read and everything I heard and all the podcasts, whatever, was about focus and don't get distracted. Really focus on your MVP, work out what's your little niche of the market and go after that and really own that. And so we thought this is music photography. And to validate that idea, we would go out to music clubs and festivals and talk to the people we saw there. And often we see the same people. So we validated with them, would you use this app? Would you be interested in taking photos and winning cool stuff and backstage passes and such? And surprised, people who go to concerts all the time are quite happy to win free concerts or experiences. So we thought we'd hit this bullseye of product market fit. And little did we know that this was just a massive case of confirmation bias where we were talking to all the other people who didn't go to concerts every week or who went to a concert once every 6 months. And what felt like, wow, 100% of the people we're talking to would use this. That's a very small group of people. And we hyper-focused without really understanding the size of the addressable market, I think. And we had opportunities, like we had an NFL team come to us and say, we would love to do live fan engagement, live crowd engagement during breaks and let people share their photos from the crowd and who's the biggest fan and gamify that. And we're like, nope. The podcasts have told us we're not allowed to deviate. We're focused. We have got to launch music, and that's our focus. Sorry, NFL. We're focusing on our niche, which was, as I said, a lot smaller than we first anticipated. So I think it's very important to have conviction and like often ignore the consensus and what everyone else is telling you. But you've also got to keep your eyes open, just look for opportunities, because we could have potentially, obviously, who knows if it would work, but with the exact same technology we built, we could have been working with NFL teams with huge audiences and lots of sponsorship money versus a few indie bands. So yeah, I think it's that. It's really trying to look at the right markets and not just like narrow your scopes, ignore the signal and go after the noise, maybe. I don't know.
Very cool. And this is basically a joke, but I didn't realize that we podcasters had such awesome influence. So, Mike, the pressure is on us to avoid saying imprudent things on the podcast from henceforward. Thanks for the warning, Daniel.
That's all right. We can always edit things out.
How did you?
But I do want to ask Daniel real quick
That's
because
right.
when you were going through and building your first startup and trying to figure out how to navigate everything, and if you go back to where you were there with the current situation with AI right now, right? If you are someone with a great idea and you're not technical, it's okay because you have the tool sets now available to you to be able to go ahead and just build very easily and vibe coding and using Cloud Copilot, etc. on Cloud Code. So if you had this tool set going back, how would you change, just out of curiosity, how would you change your approach? Would you change your approach?
I think that the music industry, it was at a time, this was like the early 2010s, where musicians still were very guarded about their image, and there was a big worry about selling out. And now anyone and everyone will do a commercial or write a jingle or appear on any ad possible. So I think that ship has sailed. But it was an opportunity. Like I think we had some big things in front of us, but because I wasn't technical, I struggled to hire a technical co-founder, and I went through a few. I really was like, can you write code? I don't know what kind of code you should be writing, but if you've got availability, willing to not get paid, get some equity, CTO title, and can build something, you are my CTO. And I went through probably 3 CTOs not knowing how to vet that ability. So we had all these false starts. And in some of those, we had a global tour with a huge pop singer, like one of the top 4 biggest pop singers probably, and a car brand that was going to sponsor this global tour. We had opportunities with like big festivals and huge clothing brands were going to sponsor live photo feeds in between sets. So while the band's changing, you get to see all the photos. So there were all these opportunities that we faltered on because we didn't have a good enough product. We didn't have our Android app ready in time. We only had an iPhone app and stuff. So being able to like get something coded and live without relying on the technical team would have made a big difference, I think, in our trajectory. If we could have hit some of those bigger tours, then maybe the music niche would have been enough for us to stick in. But because we're stuck playing in the indie, smaller kind of market, it just didn't get that big penetration. So I do think we would have either launched and been more successful because we would have gotten to scale, or we would have realized even at scale, this isn't a good business. So let's go talk to the NFL again. So yeah, I think being able to fail fast or hit the right inflection point would have made a difference.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the value proposition with vibe coding or solo founder that's not technical, but that is got a business acumen, that's got a marketing acumen. They can go ahead and push something out fairly quickly, a lot of quick testing potentially as well. So I think this is a very interesting time we live in right now where you're probably seeing a lot more either solo founders that's not technical, but get to a point where you could have the benefit of a technical founder being able to support that as well. I just want to pick your brain a little bit on that front and see where potentially the trajectory could have gone.
It's also tricky because that would be ideal if it was only me who had access to Lovable or something, as opposed to the world,
Right.
where if, the barrier to entry then was I had to put in hours of work and networking and reading blogs and listening to podcasts and having coffee meetings with every Tom, Dick, and Harry who had some sort of technical background who was willing to give me the time of day to try and get there. So there was a lot of friction to launching a startup. So that was the barrier to entry, was you were either technical or you had an idea and were willing to put in the grunt work to build a team around you. So yeah, if that was all available back then, I'm sure there would have been plenty of others with the same or similar ideas coming off in space. So the barrier to entry goes down, but the competitive moats disappear. You've got it's really about that execution.
Very cool. And I'm curious how you got, Daniel, from the world we're describing of music and global tours to corporate travel management, which on the surface might seem far afield, but I'm just curious how that bridge happened and what the origin story of Shep may have been.
When we were wrapping up Vivo Gig and saw that this was a cool idea, but just not a viable business at the scale we were able to operate at and the amount of money we'd raised, basically was looking at a corporate job, looked at all the things I did as a startup founder and decided that, because at that point I was doing fundraising, marketing, sales, product management, HR, whatever. And I really liked the product side of things, trying to think about roadmap and planning what features to build and make those decisions. So I figured I need a job. Cash was tight after a couple of years in this floundering startup. So looked at product manager jobs and was about to take a kind of a desk job at Dell as a sort of mid-level product manager when I saw on Craigslist, of all places, a well-funded stealth AI startup and a head of product. So I was like, this is the day before I was going to accept a kind of desk job and decided, screw it, I'll just give this a try. And that ended up being a travel company. So I wasn't targeting travel per se. It just sounded like a startup that was a bit further along with more traction, more funding, and a bit more of a stable job. So yeah, I joined a company called TripChamp as the head of product and then chief product officer, and eventually acting COO for a while as well. So I had a few hats there. But yeah, we were building travel tech. We were building normalizing AI technology where you could take unstructured content, so like consolidated content, multiple GDSs, LCCs, and combine those into a single feed. And that was my entrance into travel. So we're building a consumer-facing site, and then really got a lot of interest from overseas, from India in particular, for the ability to sell consolidated fares online and being able to structure that and display that in a single feed. And that's how I got into travel. I actually went over to New Delhi and with my wife and kids, and we lived there for 4 or 5 months because I realized trying to product manage the integration of our normalizing technology into their booking tools was going to be very difficult from afar. And ended up working in an Indian office, and wife and kids were homeschooling, and we traveled around India and Asia and had a great time, but really obviously hard work because I'd work during the day in the office and then I'd get home and be on Skype till 3 a.m. with my US team, coordinating all that. And got put in front of at a TMC conference and was brought out as the American technology guy with American AI technology, bringing all this cool technology into the world there. And started understanding the whole world of TMCs and such, and managed travel. So when I came back from India, burnt out from that whole experience, I decided it was time to jump ship and start something myself. I had been working as a early employee there, but really like being a founder. So came up with the idea for Shep, which I can go into if you want, or I can take a break.
Definitely feel free to take a break. But yeah, we would love to hear just a bit how that first seed of an idea germinated for what became Shep. There must have been some popcorn trail that maybe observations you made about the world that kind of led to that? I'd just be curious to hear what that thought process was. And I'm sure in hindsight, it's probably a bit of narrative smoothing to what is sometimes a jagged path. But to the extent you can go back in time to beginning to piece that together, what did that feel like and how did you do that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the Jobsy and looking backwards and connecting the dots. But yeah, they basically, as that company, TripChamp, started looking at the managed travel market and applications for that technology. So that company's not around anymore. But as we started looking at what are the opportunities for managed travel, I started talking to friends who worked in larger companies and hearing about their experience working with TMCs, and obviously at that point, very Concur heavy. And no surprise, everyone hated Concur. Every one of my friends who used it couldn't stand it. And just, it was a necessary evil, basically, to work at a big company if you had to travel. So my thinking was that what companies were trying to achieve with the sort of enforced booking tool is you want visibility into what's being booked, you want some level of control, and you want savings. And that's like why you're making people use these tools. So my thinking was, is there a way to accomplish that outside of a walled garden? And so basically bought and browser extensions. I was using a lot of browser extensions, Grammarly and shopping ones and all sorts of things, comparing prices and getting me better deals and all that sort of stuff. So I really liked the browser extension technology and thought, surely if we can use a browser extension to communicate at the point of sale around these things, policy and savings, and give visibility back to the business, maybe that achieves the same goals. So our thinking was basically to build almost a decentralized OBT-ish using this browser extension. And part of what I did was I looked at my experience with TripChamp and I made like a to-don't list. I was like, these are the things I don't want to do. I like travel. I've now built a little bit of a network in travel, but I don't want to take payment. I don't want to do customer service. I don't want to answer phone calls or worry about chargebacks and fraud and all these things that I'd been having to deal with the other company. So what was left was like reporting, data, communication, all that sort of stuff. So what Shep was a browser extension. So when you went onto Expedia or Orbitz or Airbnb, would use a little bit of AI to read and understand the screen and the context. And then when and it would pop up a little notification saying, hey, your accommodation policy is under $300 and your flights is whatever, this much, lowest logical, whatever the case is. And when you clicked on a result, let's say on Airbnb, it would then do a quick calculation, say, hey, this is out of policy. This is too expensive. Why are you booking it? And as the browser extension, you literally are still on Airbnb. It's just overlaying on top of that these little conversational boxes. So you could click and have exception codes. I'm booking this because it's around the corner. I could add in any commentary and then I would send a Slack message to my travel manager or whoever I was working with. Now, obviously, we were targeting the SMB unmanaged market. Was the companies that were just about to get on that, oh, we've just raised a Series B, we probably need TMC and an OBT and all that. We were trying to go after that segment. And yeah, that was the thinking, was like it's giving full visibility, what was booked, when, how, why, how much was spent. And we built dashboards and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, moved fairly quickly from the SMB market into the TMC market because we didn't know, we understood leakage was a thing, but hadn't really paid much attention to it. But we had some travel managers reach out and be like, you guys have solved leakage. This is such a big problem. Why don't you come to us? Come work with us. So we really wanted to go after this unmanaged travel market, as so many startups do. We all know it's very fragmented, difficult to target. You don't know which companies spend enough to care about travel. So it was quite slow going. And we came out at about the same time as TripPerk was just starting, TripPerk at the time, and Travel Perk, sorry, and Trip Actions, early Navan, and there were quite a few Rocket Trip, and yeah, there was quite a few startups that all came out at the same time, going after the same segment, and all ended up pivoting up market because it's so difficult to know who to target.
Yeah, I think
so.
Even
that's where Flight Center came in. Was
a little bit after even Kayak came into the game with their Kayak for Business as well.
Yeah, exactly. So We definitely wanted to be a standalone product. Seeing this fragmented market and trying to fundraise in that space was a little tricky. So we had a few customers and it was going fairly well, raised some VC funds and such. But just decided that moving and partnering with TMCs to solve leakage as opposed to competing with TMCs was probably a smarter path. So that's where we ended up, was working. Yeah.
One way to think about that, Daniel, if I compare it to your first startup go around, this time when the NFL came calling, you took the call.
Exactly.
And so welcome to Flight Center Travel Group, NFL in this analogy. That's very cool. And did Flight Center Travel Group unfold rather quickly as a courtship, or was that a process? Like, how did that come about?
Yep. So we got a website up just launching, especially back in those days. That was the first thing you did, was launch a splash page with collect emails and trying to validate a little bit, is this an idea worth doing? And then we got a website up once we built a prototype. And Flight Center was probably maybe our first 5 chats in our little chat when it was just crickets, when we just launched the site. Someone from Flight Center popped up then, was like, hey, this sounds interesting, let's chat. So that immediately got me dialed into the culture there, that they clearly were paying attention to the market, to what was happening. And then very quickly, John Morehouse brought us in and was like, hey, let's put you in front of a few customers. And I think where I met both of you guys was through Plug and Play. So going through Plug and Play and meeting with CWT and with Flight Center and Expedia and all the companies there, built up a lot of those connections and those relationships. And we really deepened our relationship with Flight Center there. But one thing I will say that made a big difference with Shep and the trajectory and our success was, your first startup, it's tough to do well. There's a lot you got to learn. You don't, like I said, getting the right team around you tough. Obviously different these days with AI, but you still have to have the right people to bounce ideas off of. And through this like sequence of different startups, I built up a bit of a network. I'd hired engineers as the chief product officer and all that stuff. So by the time I was leaving TripChamp, I had my 2 top engineers were like, hey, anything you want to do, we'll do with you. Like, you have an idea, we'll build it for you. So like, I had this idea around browser extension, and Ray Garcia, who's still with me now, we both work in the AI team at Flight Center. He was like, yeah, I can do that. And he built up a very quick prototype. He built up this prototype where only on Expedia, only on hotels, when the results loaded in, would put a red box around anything that was too expensive and a green box around things that were in policy. And that was like our V1 prototype. And I was sitting at an accelerator called Capital Factory here in Austin and was talking to a mentor there. So I was just giving him the demo of, here's this idea, literally was built over 2 days. Do you think this has legs? And this other guy was walking past the table. And so this guy, Mark Nathan, that I was talking to, Mark grabs Craig and says, hey, Craig, you should see this thing. So Craig says, okay, cool, stops and looks. And he's like, that's pretty cool. And so Mark explains, Craig has just sold his business to Mercedes. He's just had a big exit. He's been doing some angel investing, busy raising a VC fund, and he's going to be a VC. Craig says to me, he's like, I just went through that whole thing of being a startup acquired by Mercedes, Daimler, whatever it goes by, having to use Concur, hated the experience. If I had something like this, I would love it. Says, I haven't raised my fund yet, but as soon as I do, I'm investing. And I was like, cool. Yeah. And then I raised my angel round of funding with some real travel industry vets like Ilan Kesler, who, was with American Airlines and Travelocity, and with Kathy Mazunas, who was the first CEO of Sabre. So I got some like industry validation from some of our investors.
Very cool.
And when we were ready for our next round, Craig was there ready and he invested. And it was just like a quick prototype that being in the right place at the right time was where that funding came from. But having, I guess, my long spiel there is being able to have a second and a third time at bat with a startup. You build up your network. You can then pull in top people because you've built up that credibility. You can pull in investors and all that stuff. Fundraising was easier because the people I'd worked with had seen how it operated, that I'd been honest with them, kept them up to date, told them what was going and not. So they knew they could invest again, because even if this one failed as well, then I was doing my utmost and being above board with things.
control of it. Over
Yeah,
to you.
no, I really like that story, Daniel, because it makes me think a little bit about, and you mentioned a lot of the TMC incumbents and also the startups that's been successful, obviously, because there is a lot of pain and friction in corporate travel, especially from the traveler side, as we all have gone through and trying to figure out how to manage the tools and the booking and try to make sure that we don't go off platform and book on Expedia, which I have done so in the past myself, because you find better routes, better times, better flights, and so forth. But so if we look at all of that and we say, okay, here is where corporate travel was in the past 10, 15 years or so, and then all the new player that's come online to try to solve all these different pain points. If you look at this in a more holistic lens, do you see there's been a lot of changes in corporate travel? And if there's any specific areas that you think there's a lot of opportunity still left for it?
Yeah, look, I think corporate travel and booking travel in particular, I think people are coming around to the realization, or are soon going to, that we all think it's very important, and everyone puts a lot of time and effort and money behind that. But honestly, it's like expenses. Like expense management used to be such a big thing and was tedious and all that stuff. But like the newer companies that come in, your ramps and such, where I just take a photo and I'm done. I'm never having to fill out an expense report. And somehow the world hasn't stopped turning and everything keeps working. And booking travel is an enabler to do your job. Like my job is not to book travel. My job is to get to that meeting. And I think that for travel management companies, OBTs and all that stuff, it's really like your sacred cow of your OBT being the one and only interface. I think that's going to go away, where it's, if I have a event on my calendar and the next thing I have a ticket on my phone and I don't have to look at an OBT, that would be ideal. Because what I want to do is I want to get to the trip. I don't want to spend hours like going and looking at flights and comparing and filtering and all that stuff.
I like to apply the leisure travel experience to corporate travel, the frictionless experience, because as you said, like one of the biggest pain points I used to have personally, and this is 20 plus years ago, where when you're traveling and when you're done, you come back and you got to do your expense report. I remember still having to keep all the receipts and taping them up and then making copies of it and then attaching it. It takes quite a few hours out of your day, and it's pretty frustrating to do. And that's not what your job, quote unquote, is. It's just part of the whole. Yeah. And then with the age of agentic AI, I definitely see the possibility where you're basically having this travel AI agent that's understanding where you're trying to get to, why you're going, understands the policy in the program, can always keep you booking within policy. And then also at the same time, understanding like what your expenses are and being able to produce that report and just automate all of that. So it just becomes touchless almost. So I'm wondering if that's also what you meant, because I think I think you said something about invisible travel as an aspiration. That's one of the things that you coined a little bit. And I was wondering if that's what you meant with quote unquote invisible travel.
Yeah, really. Yeah, exactly. I just don't think that an interface is the be all end all. I think that if you look at like TMCs, I think that the value they bring are workflows and connections into multiple sources of truth and services and such. And I think that like my ideal trip is I have a email that comes in that says, hey, you need to be here, shows up on my calendar, and I've got a ticket. And the only time I actually have to interface with anything is almost to go backwards. John Morehouse, who I work with, he's talked about this, and I really love this thinking, where so much of what we think about booking travel is like this linear path where you walk down the hallway, you enter door by door. So first I have to search, then I look at results, then I look at the details, and then I get to the end. So he's always talked about we have to be able and willing to enter at any point in that pathway now. And like I think about almost going backwards and saying, here's the result, here's the flight. Go backwards if you want to change it, edit it. Like that's how I'd like to see the world and how we're envisioning things. Here's your result. Maybe it's being held, maybe it's booked, whatever the case is. And if this isn't perfect because we know you so well, we know your policy, your preferences, your behavioral stuff you've shown, what you've told us over time. If this isn't right, go and change it. But like, your ideal state is just the OBT, the process is invisible to me. I just have a ticket and a hotel that fits exactly my preferences and my trip. And you were talking about like the leisure equivalent, but like with so much business travel, it's like going on the same flights at the same time. I'm staying at the same brand of hotels, either because it's my preference or it's my company policy. So you don't need all that discovery. Like maybe you're going to somewhere brand new that you have no idea about and you want to really explore what all your options are. But I think for a lot of travelers, a lot of road warriors, you're not having to spend forever getting the micro perfections of your trip. You just are doing A to B and stay at C over and over again. And that shouldn't take me 20 minutes every time.
Let me throw you a curveball real quick, Daniel, and get your thoughts on the idea and the notion of blended travel or bleisure, where we try to blend our leisure into. Personally, I've done it before, right? Where you go somewhere for work, but you like, okay, this is a pretty cool area. Maybe I can go a few days early or stay a few days late, blend that leisure component into the corporate travel. And I think for quite a while, there hasn't been a lot of TMC that looked at that as an opportunity. Is that an opportunity?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it gets like I've got a diagram I've been sort of circulating a little bit about like the sort of spectrum, like how close to your core business travel activity is this? So like flying, yeah, like your meeting, that's your goal. Like you go to New York for this meeting, that's the core thing. So then you've got the enabling functions, which is like your flights and your hotels. Those enable you to achieve the goal. Booking the travel is like a step away, further abstracted from that. You know, that's enabling you to get there. Then you've got like things in between your meetings. I've got 4 hours off. Maybe I want to go see a site, but I'm still technically on my business trip. Then you've got my business trips over. I've achieved my goals. I'm going to stay over the weekend. That's getting further out from the sort of core activity. I think there's a whole spectrum there that can be addressed. I know whenever I talk to people, a lot of the concern is the far end of that spectrum when I'm extending into the weekend. You know, what if you trip and fall or you go paragliding or bungee jumping and, you know, the company sent you there, but whose liability is that under when you've extended? You know, we definitely are working our way down that list to say, booking restaurants, going, you know, doing team building activities, booking meeting rooms, even going for a tour after, you know, in between meetings. That's all stuff we should definitely address. And really with our virtual assistant, Sam, that we're building, where Sam and Mel within Flight Center, we're addressing all of those things, which is leisure related, but we're not quite going all the way to like extend your trip and stay over the weekend. But we are looking at options right now. I mean, we've got a partnership with a startup called Odin, Odynn. They do stuff on points. They do a lot of like point conversion. So like telling you what it'll cost to like, should you book this hotel with with dollars or points? We use them to sort of bring in like what inclusions do you get? So your itinerary not just tells you where you're going from and to, but it tells you based on your loyalty level, you get Wi-Fi, lounge access, all those things that are important to the individual traveler. So we are trying to like really bring in more of that personal touch. And we are looking maybe at using Odin to say, you do want to extend your trip. Here's your points. Click here to convert those into a stay. But we're not there yet. But yeah, like I said, it's really trying to like focus on the things that are closer to the core activity that aren't maybe work related, but still improve your trip. And I think that's one of the things like, speaking to you about this the other day, where we all in our industry, we've all looked at, you know, the OTAs, so many acronyms. We all look at the OTAs and it's like, that's the level that we need to achieve when you're building an OBT. You know, everyone's comparing Concur to Expedia and that's the whole thing. But honestly, like that's changed now because how often does your average traveler look at Expedia? You know, maybe it's, even if they go on lots of vacations, maybe it's 5 times a year, but they're not on Expedia all the time. Now what's being compared is your chat interface, your chat assistant. And that's something that the average person's probably using every day. Everyone is using ChatGPT or Claude a lot, a huge amount, possibly every day. So when you've got a TMC chatbot, someone's got to have really high expectations because the bar has been set very high with a very high frequency use experience. And so if we all thought it was like difficult to keep up to par with like the OTAs, it's going to be even more difficult to kind of keep your company TMC chatbot up to pace with, the best funded and fastest growing companies in the world.
Daniel, that point is so on point that I want to dig into that a little bit. In a way, you're pointing out that this moment in time is probably a bit unique. There's a case to be made for the AI revolution rhyming with previous revolutions that I won't name, but we all know them. But maybe I'd love it if you could comment on what's different this time. Like, what is the shift in thinking? And maybe that's not even the right dimension. So take this wherever you will. But what kind of shift in thinking does this moment call for? Is there anything as a recurring blind spot for the industry or things that you would wish you could challenge people's perspective on in a friendly manner? What would you say to that?
I think similar to what I said earlier, I think there's no sacred cows anymore. What you think and believe your business is or your value prop, whether you're a company or an individual, you're like, I'm great at this thing and that's what I'm going to do. You really have to take a step back and reevaluate and say, what is different now? Do I need to redefine my value prop as a individual contributor, as a manager, as a company, as a tool? All of these things are different. So I think if your OBT is your sacred cow and we're going to force everyone through this, I think being able to take a step back and say, actually, the value that we bring are workflows, communication, data, all these sort of things. Let's get really good at that and not be tied down to one interface or one way of working. Really be flexible. People's behavior is changing massively on a daily basis. And so their expectations are going to be in line with that. The ideal travel experience would encompass all of those things. I think now you just look at your Claude or ChatGPT can do anything and everything. You don't even have to combine 4 different products to find the best in class of those different services. They bring it all together and you can see how they are disrupting so many industries. They're disrupting so many ways of working, of building, of everything. So if you are like dead set, like I was, on like the music industry, this is the one and only thing, and you're ignoring what's going on in the world around you, I think you need to be pretty agile and focus more on maybe like how to do things than what, because your what may change. Like suddenly your customer may not need a certain thing from you because there's a better, easier way for them to do it. So your value, your sort of value metric has to change. So you've got to almost diversify your offerings so that you're not like just a one-trick pony. If you are a one-trick pony, that trick's got to be able to be ported over and accessed through multiple interfaces. You cannot force people down that pathway anymore, down that corridor, because they're getting used to being able to pull in whatever data, whatever information into their preferred tool, as opposed to you forcing them into yours.
To help people, that's a major challenge for not just the travel industry, but for everyone on Earth, because it's a pretty major inflection point in the history of the world, maybe akin to the printing press, et cetera. Maybe the people who have always thought of it a certain way are going to find that a bit challenging. And I'm wondering, are there any practices or resources or modes of thinking that you found help people who find this an unusually challenging time and want to get a little bit unstuck in terms of their thinking? Like, how might you dislodge somebody who's feeling that as a pain?
One of the things I did a couple of years ago was like I had a post-it on my monitor that said, how could you do this with AI? And so every time I started doing something, I forced myself to reimagine, is there a different way to do this? Even if it maybe took me longer. And I kept trying to think about every process, everything I did, reading an email, writing an email, creating a deck, preparing for an interview, whatever the case was, I forced myself into that as my first step. And sometimes the answer is no, but it just got me to the habit of my brain, like thinking, I've got this job to do. Here, is there a way to achieve it with that? So just building up that familiarity. The other thing, not revolutionary, but like I just trying to use it at home. In work, everyone just gets so heads down. You've just got deliverables, you've got timelines and people wanting things from you and your inbox is growing. It gets really difficult to carve out that time to learn something new. I think it's critical. But one of the ways I grew my skill set the fastest with this new generative AI world over the last few years is just adopting it at home and saying same thing, like how could I do my shopping list using AI? How could I plan out my garage redesign? And so the more ways you use it in different modalities, the more you start to understand the scope and the capabilities and the speed, that's kind of really helped me unblock my brain about here's AI jobs and here are non-AI jobs. Just being able to like, and I'm not saying you have to do everything AI now and forever, but like just that exercise of forcing yourself to think through things with AI, then you understand where the strengths and weaknesses are and you can adapt.
Yeah.
Try and adapt to pick. You then start thinking about, is this a good AI or not? And you've always got that as an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. Another thing I just do is I've told rooms of travel managers, like, just ask the AI. They're like, how should we start? Let's ask it.
I
Like
was
literally say, here's my job. What can and should I do?
I was literally going to say that because quite a few months ago, when I was playing with different AI products before OpenClaw became a thing, I think one of the first things I was playing with was Manus before Facebook acquired it. And I remember one of the first thing I did was I literally said, I just downloaded you and I want you to onboard me. What are some of the things I use you best, right? And then it just gives you like this. And it's such a great way to approach these products because you can literally onboard yourself. Back to what you were saying earlier, Daniel, about companies, even startups, any SaaS company right now that potentially could face disruption because, and we've already saw like in different spaces, like cybersecurity, for example, right? Whenever cloud announces something new, then some cybersecurity companies like, oh my God, their stock drops 15%. But any company that's obviously, I think one thing that's really interesting that I'm keeping an eye on looking at as well is, especially for startups, before you're building for human users, and you probably still are, and this is going to go back to what you're doing at Flight Center as well, Daniel, because ultimately the question is, are you guys doing anything for kind of the agentic to agentic world, right? Where my AI agent, like I'm using cloud computer, for example, and once you go in there and configure it, there's like categories, right? Like it could be business related applications that you can connect it to, travel applications, etc. as well. But essentially, you have an agent that could potentially communicate with your company products agent. So it's an agent to agent communication and workflow. With that, one of the thing also is looking at, okay, you might have a moat, you might have a really good value proposition, but then at the same time, what is your total addressable market now? It's completely different than a TAM for humans where, okay, that's the addressable market. But now you're also looking at dealing with AI agents. So curious, first of all, what do you think about that space when it comes to looking at addressable markets when you have AI agents in play, but also from, without giving anything away, but maybe just at a high level, from a business that is developing their own AI agents to be able to engage with individuals like us that's using agents heavily?
Look, I think that the whole internet's going to end up being pretty re-architected. If you look at a lot of the browser use type things, where Claude Cowork can go and browse around on your web browser, and often just get stuck on like simple things. You look at it and you're like, why is it taking it's so slow or so long? The stuff improves all the time, but like I use the Comet browser as well, and like it's great. It suddenly understands the page and moves and just clicks around and does whatever I want and answers questions, but then it'll get stuck on something very simple. So I think people are going to start reworking their websites to be agent first as the primary like collector and aggregator of information to bring into these chat interfaces.
It's a browser
Yeah, but
from
we definitely like
Bleisure. Just if anybody is listening, like, what new browser is he talking about? I use it as well. It's awesome. You have an AI assistant button that you click and you get another like little panel that opens up and you can just, and the first thing I did just for fun was I was watching a YouTube video on some financial topic and I literally was like, give me a summary, gave me a summary. And then you could just basically get into a whole conversation about that YouTube video with AI. It's pretty interesting. Great way to learn.
Yeah, but like that's an example of like how to start to feel comfortable with this stuff was like my daughter, she's busy going to college, about to start going to college, busy looking for grants and scholarships and all that stuff. And she was just like, it takes so long to read through all this stuff. So I got her to install that browser and just said, go to a page and just copy and paste this little snippet about yourself. Say, I'm a white female from Texas who's going into STEM. And now here's my is there anything on this page that is a good fit for me? And it's just saved to hours. And so again, it's like taking this stuff home and trying with it at home, because you've got a bit more time, hopefully, sometimes outside of your work deadlines, where you can so try to be creative and look for ways to use it and learn capabilities. But yeah, so as far as what we're doing, so we're building within Flight Center, we've got our sort of corporate side, which is where I work, and we've got our like leisure side, which is this sort of like brick and mortar Flight Center, selling holidays and such. I'm on the corporate side. So we've got two corporate brands. We've got FCM for the large enterprises. We've got Corporate Traveler for the SMBs, smaller businesses. And my team has built an AI layer that works in both. So on the FCM side, it's called SAM. In the CT side, it's called Melon. So we've got basically very similar chatbot kind of experience, where we've built a lot of like personalization and logic on top of that. And we're coming out in May. We've been piloting with customers, going full capability, giving it to all of our customers on the FCM side in May. And we definitely see a need longer term to work in other people's ecosystems as well, in an A or agent to agent kind of interface, where you've got your own internal company GPT or AI tool, and you want to ask Sam a question about your travel policy. I don't think you will be super happy having to go and switch over and log in and out and stuff to get to Sam to get the question. So we definitely see that coming. We just obviously want it to work incredibly well in our world before we start putting it into other people. Like, I think the first step to that is integrating into like Teams and Slack, where I can ask Sam questions and I can search for flights and hotels using natural language in my work tool, let's say being Teams, and I can still book and all that stuff. And that kind of comes down to like, maybe your OBT isn't the golden goose. Maybe it's the workflow and ability to book policy compliant, personalized flights, surface those wherever the travelers are instead of forcing the travelers into your world. And so I think that's the first step, is like launching SAM to our general customers, then bringing it into their work tools, and then maybe there's an agent to agent world as well, where your AI agent talks to our AI agent and they do business dealings together behind the scenes. But it's definitely a phased approach.
That'd be awesome, right? Living in that world where there's that frictionless experience for corporate travel as well, but also what you're talking about, some of the feature potentially for Sam, maybe there's additional value prop that comes out of it. But like one of the big pain points, I think a lot of people in corporate travel potentially, I think at least from my personal experience in the past, was like multi-location coordination, when you have resources in different places that need to get somewhere and for an event or a conference or something like that. And you're also trying to figure out like, what is the best routes and that's cost effective for everybody that's in different part of the country or different part of the world and so forth. So I think an agentic workflow around that could be super interesting.
And that's how we, with Sam and Mel, is basically building multi-personas as well. So it's not just the traveler, where a lot of TMC chatbots are really trying to solve that FAQs, getting people not to pick up the phone and plug up the phone lines, trying to talk to consultants or agents, but helping with the support. But we're also building workflows in for the travel manager, for the travel booker. And so you've got the same sort of things. Is what if I moved all my volume from airline A to B? What does that scenario look like? And how many travelers have been on red eyes? And I think that's where things start to go as well. It's like this concept of policy for one, where not everyone is the same. Maybe Joel's had 5 red eyes in a row and he hasn't seen his family in a while. And maybe the policy changes because of that, because this is a high value meeting with a large ROI. And so I'm not going to make him fly economy because I want him to get a good night's sleep and close the deal. Yeah. So I think that personalized, not just down to your individual preferences, but actually personalized down to what's the best outcome for this trip.
Right. Almost in a way where you have the AI that has a holistic view of things to be able to dynamically put together a new policy almost. Very cool.
Yeah, the context is not just like person A booking a flight to B and back. There's a whole lot of information around that really could shape what kind of trip it is, what kind of policy it is, all that sort of stuff.
I have to say, I'm loving this whole dialogue, but this is reminding me of years ago. I happen to be of Scandinavian descent, and so we hear a little bit about Protestant work ethic. And I remember several years ago sharing the thought that we really need to at least consider the possibility of the Protestant play ethic, And I remember sharing that thought to crickets that remain to this day. So it was either it was an idiotic thought or it was slightly ahead of its time. But I guess what strikes me is that as an industry, we really need to have a little bit of a spirit of play, and even right down to the individual level. Like you gave the example, Danielle, reimagining your garage using AI. That's a low pressure context where you might have unexpected learnings that poured very easily back to work life, but just giving yourself permission to play. And I think for so long as an industry, we've taken the space of OBT suffocatingly seriously. And maybe this is a long way of getting into my question, Daniel. I've heard you say that AI is greater than UI, and I think we've grazed what you mean by that, but maybe can you share a little bit more about maybe just underscore that for folks why that's the case, and maybe if you can introduce just a bit of spirit of play as you answer the question.
Look, I think that it's just really trying to, like you said, I've brushed on this, but it's just that thinking that like the job, like when I was back in the Shep days, was like trying to get to the core. What is the company trying to achieve by implementing an OBT? It's that control, savings, visibility, all that sort of stuff. And it's then taking that kind of what's behind the rationale behind our decisions, and just peeling back those layers and getting rid of some of those assumptions that feel essential, and saying, look, what we're trying to do is get person A to this trip, to this place. How can that be achieved? Is there a new way that could be done? And I just feel like that ability to detach ourselves from a UI and provide value in any touch point is pretty critical. So I'm in the middle of writing an article about the sort of 6 surface strategy as my sort of alliteration there, but really just saying, what does our AI implementation look like on surface 1, which is the biggest, which is like the desktop? We've got all sorts of UI. We can do maps and we can do filters and comparison and all that stuff. How does Sam and Mel and the AI show up there? And then you zoom out a little bit, and then you go down to like phones, and you go down to tablets and phones and watches and AR glasses and all these sort of things, and voice only. And so you need to deliver your value proposition using AI across all of these different UIs, basically. And so how do you think about implementing your value prop, whether someone's on a massive desktop or just talking AI to an AI voice? How do you still deliver value, personalize, get the right content, and bring a human into the loop when needed across all these interfaces? So it's not so much about being tied to one static look and feel. It's really about, and there's definitely a time and a place for big, complicated, I want to compare things, I want to see things on a map and see everything side by side. So that's still going to be critical in travel, but that's not the one and only. It's really trying to say, how do we abstract the value we deliver off of the monolith of our tools to be available to people wherever they want to touch it?
I feel like you're pointing us to think a little bit more in essence as an industry. So think about the essence of things and the why of things. And the image that comes to mind listening to you, for what it's worth, is water. Water flows anywhere and everywhere. There's that old saying, the highest virtue is like water. And I think as an industry, maybe we've been rather obsessed with the gates and the walls and the borders. And maybe there's something to be said for water as a seed of inspiration for somebody out there to think about how might this value flow wherever it needs to rather easily. So how do you see the role of TMCs evolving in the next few years? What might be the same if we chatted with you in a few years, and what might be different, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're sort of like global TMCs. We're obviously thinking about this a lot. It's like, what is our value? And I think every industry is looking at like, what is the value? And you've got a lot of these industries where the intermediary is just being jumped over. Your sort of middleman businesses are at threat. But I think, sort of especially a global large TMC, the value props get into the duty of care and the global content and the connectivity. And there's so many little bits and pieces that a business has to have in their travel program that the TMC really becomes that connective tissue. I think it's, how do you become that aggregator of different sources of truth to deliver that value in a unified way? And so I think it's that aggregator of value, content, personalization, all that stuff, because managed travel is very, very complicated and there's a lot of moving parts. And it may seem as easy as saying, oh, we'll just get a Sabre MCP server and put a PDF of our travel policy in ChatGPT, and off we go. We now manage travel, but there's so many gaps there that just have to be addressed. And so I think that the value prop again is like that. How do we deliver all of these services but decoupled from our proprietary tech stack? We have to sort of like abstract ourselves away from the UI to say we can deliver these things, GDPR savings reporting, consulting, all these things across the board, across any interface that you are working on. So I think it's that transition from a service industry to a tech industry to like a services via tech, like being able to like propagate out everything we do into all the places that travelers and customers are. I think it is that aggregator and distributor.
So Daniel, I want to go back. First of all, when you publish your Surface article, please do share it with us because I'd be very interested in reading it.
Yeah, for sure.
And also just the way that you're describing it almost makes me feel like it's not just an advice or a perspective for startups, founders, for anyone that's looking to build. But I know for a fact that you have mentored startup founders in the past, probably currently as well. So love to take the opportunity to democratize and pick your brain a little bit. If you have one or two top advice, especially at this point in time where things are moving so fast. And we talked about potential, a lot of opportunities for like solo founders, et cetera, as well. But at the end of the day, if you had to synthesize your mentorship experience in the past few years, what are some of the like maybe top one or two advice that you would give?
I think even more so today than in the past, it's like we said earlier, the barrier to entry is a lot lower and there's a lot less friction to build things. And I think that can be dangerous as well, where if you're resource constrained, you have to make very intentional decisions. You really are building the right thing at the right time. And I think in a world where you can build anything at any time, you risk building just a confusing mess that, people are going to have to try and work out. So I think I think the value of a advisory board is super high. So like that's one of the things we did was I just filled in the gaps. I was like, look, I know this and this and this, but I don't know corporate travel so much. So I brought in advisors into my startup advisory board who knew corporate travel, and I wasn't great at enterprise sales. I had to learn that. So I brought someone in who'd done enterprise sales. I kind of filled my gaps. Instead of hiring a head of enterprise sales, I still knew I had to do it myself, but I brought in an advisor who could look over my emails and look at my sort of flows and HubSpot sequences and all that stuff, and really help me fill in those gaps. So I think, especially if you're not from the industry you're building in, like having new, fresh ideas and not knowing what the limits are or the reasons things haven't been done in the past can help bringing fresh eyes to things. But then having that advisory board who can say, actually, maybe let's do that later. Let's not do that. Here's why this isn't a good idea. Because like I said, at this point, you could build anything you want, and that's not necessarily what the customers are going to be looking for. So yeah, I think the power of saying no to things is pretty important today, more so than ever before. Yeah. The other thing I'd say to startup founders is just follow up. I think that I saw this in sales as well, doing enterprise sales. At first you think your idea is just so incredible that if someone sees and says no, or not yet, then they're obviously an idiot, or they'll come around to it. They'll come around to the idea. And it's just not the way the world works. You just have to stay top of mind. And so one of the things I did as a startup founder was every time I'd have a meeting with someone, I'd say, hey, I've got a monthly update email that I send out, could be quarterly, whatever, what our wins are, our customer wins, fundraising process, maybe some videos showing you new features, just to keep you up to date. And that process really helps because as a mentor, like I do office hours and I meet with 4 companies a week, whatever the case is, and I just don't have the bandwidth to remember all of them and to stay top of mind. But if someone was to say to me, hey, I'm wondering, like if someone had said back in the day, I want to manage travel, but I don't feel like we spend enough to justify using Concur, if I just got an email from Daniel about Shep, this browser extension, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I know that thing. So I think staying top of mind and reaching back out and following up is pretty essential. It's not a one and done. I don't remember the stat, but it's something like the average sale took 8 touches before someone, yeah, you just have to build those lists, those drip campaigns, and just keep going until suddenly someone has the need or has the budget or hears from someone else who needs it. One of the investors I ended up getting, he passed on 2 of my startups, and he just one day I bumped into him. He's like, "I've been loving following your story." I was like, "You've been like reading my updates for 2 years. You've never said a word. You've never said good job or leave me alone or anything. You just silently followed along." And I just love the fact that you are open and honest and share all this stuff. What are you working on now? And then we built a relationship. We had one meeting, 30 minutes, once upon a time, never heard from him again, but he'd clearly been paying attention and actually got very involved. So I just think that the value of following up can't be understated.
I love that. I absolutely agree. Investor updates is probably one of my top recommendations as well to founders, because obviously, as you said, it's great to keep an update where you are, where you're doing wrong. It's a great tool, especially if the investor passed now, but you keep them updated. Either later on they could be interested, or their network could be interested that they could pass your updates to as well. All right, with that, I think we're just at time. We do a little flash prediction game on this podcast, Daniel, that I want to throw at you a little bit and see. But just before we get into it, are you a fan of Web3, the space? Do you keep an update on things like stablecoins or anything like that in that space?
But yeah, it's not my focus at all. But yeah, the content I consume is all adjacent to that, so I definitely have a good awareness of it. But yeah, I'm not super focused on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I'm personally very excited about and keeping a close eye on is, and I talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago at a conference called HFTP, which is the convergence of AI and Web3 and some of the technologies that Web3 is going to enable the agentic world as well. But one of the areas is, for example, stablecoins for AI agents to leverage for like transactions, for example, because AI agents they're not going to be using credit cards, right? They're not going to be able to do microtransactions with it. They're not going to be able to create their own accounts and so forth. So to kick off the flash prediction game, the first question we have is, stablecoins will be a form of payment method as an option for online booking travel agencies like Expedia and Booking. It's a multi-choice. So option A, or choice A, if you will, is it's not going to happen at all. Expedia, OTAs, etc., they're not going to adopt stablecoins. Option B is it's going to happen within 2 years. Or option C, a little bit longer, 3 to 5 years. So you have A, B, or C.
I'd say B as an option, not the default option, but I just think there's so many upsides as far as transaction costs and, like you said, the micropayments and all that stuff that kind of makes sense.
Oh, okay. I'm going to agree with you heavily on that as well, because I definitely think it's going to be within 2 years. I think the framework that the U.S. government is putting in, like the Genius Act and Clarity Act, is going to be potentially coming online fairly soon. We're also hearing things like, for example, companies like Amazon and Walmart creating their own stablecoins. Won't get too deep into it, but the caveat is that obviously you touched a little bit on the reduction kind of cost of business and the fees, but also the other side is the potential of acquiring more customer data, if you will. So I'll just leave it at that.
Daniel, we're famous for doing the world's slowest lightning rounds. Question number 2, sir. AI on our phones, such as Siri, will be the primary agent that will orchestrate with other agents to simplify our lives in various spaces like finance, travel, medical, etc. And there will be an agent marketplace similar to how today there are app stores. And the question for you, good friend, is A, not going to happen, B, within 2 years, C, 3 to 5 years, or D, it won't be on a phone?
I'm going to say B, but I don't know that the marketplace will exist in the way that today's marketplace is, where I go and choose and say I want the TripAdvisor app or agent. I think my Siri is going to just intelligently work out what the right agent in that marketplace will be and select it and stuff. So again, that sort of invisible interaction layer, I think I'm not going to be super involved in that choice. But yeah, I think I can probably set my preferences maybe, but I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be going into a shopping environment and saying, add these 3 agents in that same way. I think my agent will be smart enough to make those connections.
Makes great sense, Daniel. And could I ask you as a follow-up, what do you think is important to be the agent chosen by the meta agent, if you will? What do you think is the key to visibility and being chosen in that context?
It's a big question. Yeah, I
We
think
can edit it out.
yeah, I haven't looked at that much. I think it's utility. It's really just, speed to result. Like I have a job to be done, and are you going to get me to my result? I think it's so much about getting to the right outcomes as efficiently as possible that I think it levels the playing field a lot, where your legacy goes away. If you're not able to get me my end result the quickest or the most efficient, then you lose. So I think it is that speed to resolution.
All right, cool. All right, last question, real fast.
Mike?
Hyper-personalization. So hyper-personalization in travel is here due to agentic AI, and will get better and better as we give it deeper access to our data. This is a true and false. Awesome. Yeah, true. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I love it, Daniel. This has been awesome. I feel like we're very aligned and very optimistic on the new world that is approaching. And of course, also, thank you very much for sharing your time with us and giving us a little peek on what you guys are doing. Looking forward to both your article and also the introduction of Sam and what was the other AI? I'm sorry? Mel. Sam.
MEL.
By the way, are those acronyms or they're just straight up names?
So Sam was a startup we acquired that was a chatbot in this sort of like when it was all the chatbot craze in the like 2017, 2018 kind of realm. So Sam came out of that, and the CTO, Adrian Lopez, is our head of AI. So him and Ray are kind of the leaders of our AI group. So we're 3 startup founders with 30 years of AI travel tech experience together. And then Sam, I believe Sam was named after a travel consultant named Samira, I think so. Sam was actually named
shout
after
out to
someone.
Samira.
Null, yeah, exactly. Null is named after the booking tool and platform in corporate traveler, which is called Melon, like watermelon. So this is just the assistant inside of Melon as Mel.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Very cool. Daniel, thank you so much. This has been a huge pleasure for us, and grateful for you making the time, and all the best in the coming days and years. Thank you so very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And a quick plug, anyone going to the GBTAs or any of the conferences over the next summer, come by the FCM booth and come check out Sam and see how it all works.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining Joel and Mike for another episode of Travel Around the Block. If you have any questions or topics you would like to see discussed on the show, or if you'd like to be considered as a potential guest or sponsor, please reach out to us at hello@travelaroundtheblock.com. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Wishing you a wonderful day wherever you are around the block.